welcome to U.S. History. I'm your host, John Green. Today I'm going to talk to you about urban America. But first, a quote from a dead guy from the 1800s that no one really knows about. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light, and it was the season of darkness. It was the age of urban development, and it was the age of social reform. Wait, that's not how the quote goes? Urbanization was caused by the growth of cities, which was caused by the market revolution that dramatically increased the size of America's cities by 7% in 1820, all the way up to 20% in 1860, and this was the largest jump in American history. Pre-industrial cities in America had been small and compact, to where people, rich and poor, lived near their workplace in a small-scale housing pattern that encouraged friendliness. Caused by the growth of immigration, the per capita income had almost doubled between 1800 and 1850, and the gap between rich and poor also increased greatly. Thanks, Obama. The poor often had unskilled working jobs, lived in cheap rented housing, moved frequently, and almost always depended on more than one income. Artisans and skilled workers lived in cramped quarters that doubled as shops. The middle class had nice houses, while the rich had mansions, townhouses with servants, and almost always multiple houses. Sanitation was a large problem in urban environments, as the cities often lacked municipal water supplies, sewers, and garbage collection. People would usually drink from wells, use outhouses that often contaminated the water supply, and they would always throw garbage out the door. This resulted in epidemics of yellow fever, cholera, and typhus. Some cities completed water systems to combat the disease, but only the wealthy could afford them. And that, kids, is why you always wash your hands. To escape the struggles of everyday life, the working class took to the streets. Now let's go to the thought bubble. New Orleans was most notable for these parades and celebrations. African-American bands would play funeral processions, while dances in the Congo Square would attract hundreds of slaves. Choctaw Indians would drum down the streets, while respectable middle-class men rang cowbells as they took part in rowdy protests. Members of this lower class paraded through the streets playing music, and by 1828, the event was taken over by gangs who walked through the city vandalizing it. Thanks, Stan. By 1829, these parades were banned. The militias were called to restrain these now called riots, and deaths were very common. This caused New York City to create a permanent police force by 1845. By 1860, 11% of the black population lived in urban areas. More than half of these people lived in the North. The African American population competed with immigrants and poor class for jobs. Residential segregation, pervasive job discrimination, segregated public schools, severe limitations of civil rights, exclusion from leisure activities and places, and public transportation were all very serious problems that the African Americans face. This led to George Bush passing the No Child Left Behind Act in 2002, just about 135 years too late. Way to keep on the ball, George Bush. African Americans, like the Irish and Germans who were also discriminated against, created their own communities. They also established their own newspapers. There were many riots against the free blacks themselves, which resulted in them forced from their jobs, and their sons were denied apprenticeships. As a result, these blacks made up a large portion of the sailors in the United States. Pay was poor and conditions were miserable, but there was more equality on ships than on land. In the end, women worked as domestic servants, washerwomen, and seamstresses just to get by. Now that I've bombarded you with cold, hard facts, it's time for a message from our sponsors.
You're on.
What? You're saying I'm on and I still have to do a conclusion?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
I don't believe you. You can roll credits or something.